everyone, welcome to part 2 of this tree ant house project that I have been working on. If you didn't watch the first video, go check that one out. I made the small little tree house that would be going on the back of this tree ant, as you can see in the top left of the video. There's a little black house there. Go check that one out if you haven't already. But in this video, I actually will be sculpting the tree ant out of polymer clay. As you can see, I kind of have a sketch there with some like wire armature guide to build the wire armature for this tree ant. Big shout out to Ace of Clay. He has a great YouTube channel where he works with polymer clay. I learned everything I know about polymer clay from his videos, so go check him out for sure. So after I got the armature done here, it just started to kind of get the pose down, and I got this kind of slice of wood like I did in my little diorama of the lumberjack guy. I thought it was a really great idea. It was really on theme with this. And I marked out where I wanted his legs to be and then drilled some holes about half the depth of the actual wood. And then I super glued them in the holes. Now, if I were to do this again, I'd probably make his legs a bit more robust, maybe wind 2 pieces of that thicker wire around each other, just to give it a bit more sturdiness. I did run into some issues later. They never came out of the wood, it's just they like to bend and flex as I was sculpting. But the side of this log was really dusty and powdery, so I ended up getting some watered down Mod Podge and coated it to prevent it from flaking everywhere. So I kind of made a mock little head out of tin foil here and made it about the size of the door was what I was aiming for. And then I started to position the house on where I thought it would be, and then started to build more onto the wire armature of the kind of bigger branches that would be holding the house up on its back. Kind of attaching them this way worked, except for the very first one I did. Go figure. Didn't end up being super sturdy later on, and you'll see that I kind of run into some issues with it later. But I learned a lot in doing this on my first armature, but it worked out in the end, which is good. So here's kind of a shot of how the house would be positioned on his back. From there, it was time to bulk everything out. So I bulked out his torso, and then I would just kind of fold some aluminum foil kind of up, tape it on, and then wrap it around, just layer over layer to kind of get the correct thickness that I was looking for. I wanted him to kind of have really beefy like lower legs, kind of like Mega Man boots, because they're going to be big, meaty, like tree trunks, and then his thighs are going to be a little bit smaller, so I layered up extra on those, as you can see here. And after that was all done, it was time to whip out the polymer clay, which this is me touching it for the very first time. This is something I've never done in my life. I've played with clay as a kid, nothing quite like this, but like, yeah, nothing. So this was a big learning experience for me, and I gotta say, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a blast. I really loved working with this clay. But I basically just rolled out a bunch of like thin sheets, cut them to size, and then wrapped them around all the different sections of the body. So yeah, this was a really straightforward process. Just paid attention to the instructions on the package, made sure that I didn't get too thick of clay on there so it would actually be able to bake later. But got a nice fleshy looking weird headless monster, and or a house for a head. The clay is very forgiving. You can leave it out, it won't harden, it's fantastic, and it blends really well with your fingers, or I preferred using tools mostly. So I rolled out some snakes and then started to attach them. I wanted these kind of big, meaty legs to be very kind of a big feature of this tree ant, and they were kind of inspired by those trees that get those really kind of fin-like root systems that kind of grow out of them. So I added a bunch of snakes on, and then I blended them all together, and I was thrilled with the outcome on this. I really loved it, and as you can see, it looks pretty good. And I just kept kind of adding more and more to it as I went along. I felt like they looked like they were chopped off at the end, and they weren't supposed to look that way. This thing's supposed to look alive, so I actually had them kind of sprawl out almost like toes all the way around it. These would be an issue later on as the armature would flex and move, but overall really happy with the way they are, even though they broke off a few times and had to re-glue them on, like seriously several times. Now, I didn't really have a full sketch of the tree ant's body, and I just kind of started adding things on as I thought they'd be cool. So I added these little like flares almost to make these legs look like they were, you know, almost just like big hollowed out tree trunks laying on the ground, but just like little like flares. I don't even know what you call them. So I took some sculptor's mesh. I have this from the way I like to make windows, which worked out nicely. Actually using it for sculpting for the first time. And I attached all of these cool little like flares around the knees, and I think they turned out awesome. I'd be curious what you guys think down in the comments, so let me know. I took a failed tree print. If you guys have seen that video where I make some trees and then totally fail and then end up 3D printing them and just being totally satisfied with them. I took those, I cut them up into pieces, and I used them to use as tree texture, and they worked out really great. So I added some more of those kind of flares on his hips as well, and they turned out looking really awesome. And yeah, just overall really pleased. Got some winding roots around his thighs going up to the hips, and this is kind of what the lower half ended up looking like. From there I started working on the arms. These were going to kind of match the lower part of the legs, just kind of a redo of what happened on the legs, but up on the arms instead. Exaggerating kind of those flares on his elbow makes him look a little bit tougher. Even though he's really not a super aggressive kind of tree ent at all. He's not mean or anything like that. But one thing that I did do differently, or there's a couple things I did differently on the upper arms, is I added some kind of like, I guess like root type things, or just kind of growths of wood. I don't know, because they're on his arms, they're not down into the ground, but they just kind of flare out and they just kind of stick out a little bit on his arms there. And I thought this ended up looking really cool. I put one on both arms. I think actually two on the other one. And then I had an idea to actually get a little bit more of a branch kind of coming out of his elbows. So took some more wire, wound them up just like a tree armature, and then wrapped them in clay, and then attached them to his elbows. And I got one on each side, and these ended up looking really cool. I think they just add a little bit more character and a little bit more, honestly, coolness to it. I think they turned out awesome. For his kind of chest and back area, I just kind of continued a theme of these kind of like really veiny looking kind of roots. I made them a lot bigger. This one ended up tearing off and twisting just to add a little bit more texture to it, and this is something I kind of continued on with the rest of the project. Again, this is the first time I've ever sculpted anything, so it was just like this big learning process the entire time. But yeah, just kind of keep kind of creeping up his chest and all around his body, on his back, and I connected these ones to those main kind of big branches at the top, and it turned out really great. So taking some old wire tree armatures that I had made, I ended up just kind of cutting them apart and started attaching them to the bigger branches, and then yeah, wound them all the way around, snipped off any excess, and this is what I was left with. Those would get changed later on because the tree ant ended up being too tall for my oven and I couldn't fit it in there. So wrapped up those branches by twisting some kind of ribbons, just some snakes that are flattened out, and then yeah, here's a good look of them kind of all wrapped up, and then some that are already textured or blended, I guess, and then I go and I texture them with that failed 3D print of a tree. And this thing was the perfect tool for all that, but things were really coming along and I was really pleased with them. As you can see, I actually made a pretty cool shoulder spot there with a big old little chopped kind of branch coming off of it. I was constantly repositioning this thing, trying to get it to hold the tree right. This branch was a problem. It wanted to drop down because it really wasn't attached to the main armature very well, but it ended up working in the long run, so no harm. But I was getting really excited at this point. Honestly, I thought it was really coming along, and I used all the clay except for this tiny little ball. So there's almost an entire pound of clay so far, and I still hadn't made his head, his hands, or I even make a really big axe for him as well. So it was time to start kind of making the hands. I used some wire again and just kind of made a bunch of fingers, left a little bit at the end, and then started twisting all those together until I had a hand. And I went with a 4-fingered hand. But these ended up turning out really great. They were the perfect size. I wanted them kind of long and lanky to match his long and lanky arms. So got those all wrapped up to attach later, but kind of just made up on the fly really what the hands were going to look like. Made them a little bit spiky and kind of cool looking. They're a little scary compared to the rest of them, I guess, but I really liked how they turned out. So it was actually now time to start working on his head, and I was actually super nervous about this. I honestly didn't know what it was going to look like. I had that original sketch of him, but I didn't really like it, so I drew up a new sketch and started to mark out kind of where things were going to happen, gave him some indentations for his eyes, and then I started to just add the features on. And so I cut out kind of his upper jaw part here with his cheekbones included, and then just kind of attached it on there and blended it. This was a bunch of trial and error for me. Like I said, I've never done anything like this. And the face was going to be kind of like, you know, his whole personality had to show in it. I mean, it was kind of like the cherry on top, or the head on top, really. And yeah, so just started piecing things together, and made the upper jaw, made a little nose for him, just using random tools to kind of get the shape and attaching it. And then I made him some eyes and some eyebrows, gave him these big kind looking, almost old man dopey kind of brows, but I really like how they turned out. After that, it was time to really kind of build out his lower part of his face. So I did the same thing that I did with his kind of upper jaw. I did the same thing with his lower jaw and got it ready for his beard, because of course it's going to have a beard. I mean, come on. I just drew this kind of freehand while I looked at the face for the lower jaw part. This kind of seemed like what would be the best process for me personally, but I know there's a number of ways you can do this. You can do it piece by piece. I'm by no means the expert, but this was a lot of fun to kind of learn. Started adding a little bit of detail for kind of like some teeth that were very kind of woody looking, I guess. But then it was time to start to kind of build out his beard, like I mentioned before. But these wires, I just kind of stuck them in, kind of cut them to length, and then eventually got the whole kind of beard kind of spread out there, kind of twisted them, got them in the shapes I wanted before I started to actually add on all of the clay, which was just as simple as making some snakes. I'd slice kind of halfway down through so I could just kind of wrap it around the actual wire, and then I would stick the wire up inside. And I did have to remove a little bit of clay to do this. But after that, it was just kind of blending it all together, and then I had his nice looking big branchy beard. It was basically just rinse and repeat after that for his head. I just kind of went up there. I did much fewer branches, and they were much thicker. They were chopped. One of them split at the top, and then it was just adding all the detail from there. And this part's really fun. You gotta just kind of get creative. So just went to town and made him look really nice and look like he was made of wood. I just used a barbecue skewer, rammed it into his torso, and then stuck it on there, and this is kind of what it would look like. So got the house on there, started tweaking his hair a little bit so it wouldn't interfere with the house and just kind of work its way around it. But once I kind of got that all solidified, I built out his neck, and then I started to attach his hands. To do this, I used some gel super glue at first to kind of get it kind of bulky and attached, and then I wrapped it with wire multiple times, and then used a thinner super glue over top of that, and then I just kind of sculpted off the rest of his wrist there to look like the kind of his elbow part. But before I did that, I actually made his big axe. Now this axe was that's a real rock that I gathered, and then I built out a wire armature for it, bulked it out. It's basically supposed to be a dead tree, which its root ball grew around a big kind of axe-shaped rock underground. And it basically uses it as a really, really big axe. I made sure it would fit with this hand that I made, and then I sculpted the roots that were wrapping around the rock. And I actually also sculpted a bit of bark on it as well that apparently I did not record. So that wraps up things for this video. The next video is going to be the final video where I paint and put all the embellishments and make it look super cool. That video might be a little bit longer because there's so much there, but thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe so you know when that video launches. And thank you so much for all my new subscribers and people who comment. I really appreciate it. Curious what your guys' ideas are for a duo like this. How would you make them work in your campaign, or what would they do? What would their purpose be? I'm going to share more about that in the next video. And yeah, thanks again so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.